Exploring the ethical challenges of co-production. And in this talk, I'm going to be explaining the methodologies I use to co-produce with community partners. I'm going to describe some of the ethical challenges I faced in my projects and provide some suggestions for good practice. And along the way, as I did the slideshow, I realized it's co-produced. It's all about the teams that I work with. So I'd like to give a photo credit to Kate Pahl, who took this picture as part of our project called Feeling Odd in the World of Education. My work is fundamentally interdisciplinary. It attempts to listen to the voices of children and young people, and you'll hear more about that later. And I'm going to give you 3 case studies from my practice, one of which hasn't been disseminated before, to explain my ideas. And the photo credit now comes to Zoe Ashcroft, whose worm art is going to be actually displayed in another web arena. Zoe is actually about 8. And so I'm able to share that ethically. But that's a piece of art from a young person. So I'm going to describe 3 projects. The first one I have written about. It was funded by the ESRC. It's called Imagine. It was focusing on the cultural context of civic engagement. And the example describes the process of producing a book with community partners in Rotherham. Second project is HRC funded, called Odd, Feeling Different in the World of Education. I was a co-I on the project. And it was looking at children's feelings of feeling odd in school. And this project was about co-produced filmmaking. Final project is new, hot off the press. No one's heard about this project in the sense of, this is the first time it's gone to 380 people. It's called Voices of Future, funded by NERC. It's a 3-year large project with 9 universities, 23 people looking at children, young people's engagement with treescapes, and it's profoundly cross-disciplinary. One of the things I feel very lucky about is that I was able to learn about co-production through a program called Connect Communities, which was led by the HRC, started in 2010, and some people might be familiar with it, which was about researching community with, by, and for communities. The fundamental thing that changed my practice was that it asked everyone who was writing grants to write the grants with communities. So it wasn't just an add up on at the end, a sort of impact bit. You actually bolted into the project co-production right from the start. And that changed radically how I wrote my grants. I literally sat in community centres and people would talk to me about what they wanted to do, and it went into the case for support. That's a very different way of working. However, I did have ethical challenges, and one of the things that was really difficult is how to create a structure that valued the knowledge, and in our case, it was about culture within communities on the same level as academics. And one of the things I think is really hard is when you get your JES form and you're applying for your money, is how you do that in the grant. And I did have a way around it, which I'm going to talk through. So one of the things I was trying to do in my grant is to write a book with communities rather than about them. And this was inspired by a book called The Other Side of Middletown, which was written by a group of community members along with Eric Lassiter and Beth Campbell, who I work with as well, where they the community co-wrote a book about itself. It felt it hadn't been represented in the literature. A group of anthropologists had written about this place, Muncie and Diana, but only from a white perspective, and the African-American community decided to write their own book. So the idea of collaborative ethnography was extended to ethnographic writing, and I felt that was a very important turn in my co-productive practice. So one of the things that was really important was this idea of producing more dialogically centered and multivocal texts, and this idea of working reciprocally with communities to make sense of things together. And that was a real turn for me. And so we did a book called Reimagining Contested Communities. We sat around and talked through our ideas. The key was that the community partners were given the same level of financial support as the academics. The academics didn't like that very much. The community partners loved it and did about twice as much work. And the time for writing was written into the grant. So one of the things that was really important about this case study is there's a co-writing structure. All voices were important. We also included artists, and their work was reproduced in colour in the book, which is actually quite rare. We work with poets, we work with historians, we work with parents, we work with young people, and we had multiple representations, visual, poetic, and artistic. And one of the things I'm really proud of is this quote means a lot to me because it's by someone called Zainab Rasool, who I work with as a community researcher. And she wrote this piece after 30 years of working with community. I advocate the view that everybody holds the key to knowledge. And one of the things that's most exciting about the next few weeks is on the 14th of July, I go and see Zainab acquire her doctorate at the University of Sheffield. I can't wait, because she actually also managed to do a doctorate at the same time as doing this project. But this idea of communities having knowledge is something that is really important. We also work with two amazing civil servants, and I have to say the civil service have been amazing all the way through my project. At the moment, we're working with DEFRA. They wrote a piece for our book about the mission of collaborative ethnography is to bring the academic research endeavour closer to communities. I love this piece. The questions of whose knowledge and whose, I can't read that bit, counts for whom is an issue that should be asked of all research and indeed all knowledge claims. And I think that piece, written by the then DCLG, is a really important statement. So takeaways, I've got takeaways from this case study. Building relationships take time. So this is built on about 5 years previously of working in Rotherham on another project. Go where people are. I recently did a project here in Manchester, and we situated the meeting in Hume, not in the university. Don't expect people to come to you. Always provide appropriate snacks. Young people actually like protein. Some of them don't get enough to eat. I do think snacks are one of the most important things ever. Writing is not always what people do. Try and put things in other people's opportunities to put things in other words. I often do recording of people's discussions. Oh my gosh, that's a practice alarm, I think. Practice alarm, hooray. Do not assume that academics know everything, but recognize that some academics do know something. Certainly our scientists knew a lot. Build communities within a model of horizontal knowledge production. Second challenge, one of the things that's really hard about co-production is that it means that everybody has a say. And that's really tough when you're working with children and young people, in the sense that actually schools, and this is not to say that schools aren't amazing places, but they rely on a kind of yes from young people. And one of the things we were doing in our project was encouraging another word, which is the word no. Now, this was a project based in a school. The idea was to explore with a group of young people the idea of feeling odd in the world of education. It was led by Rachel Holmes. It was funded by the ESRC, and again, we had the luxury of 3 years working with the same group of children over time, using film to explore that. And one of the things that we did is we worked with these children before lockdown. They were in year 4 and 5 before lockdown, and they made short films in self-directed small groups. And they actually did the filming themselves. And then they devised a kind of presentation from the film, which actually they gave to the conference, BERA conference. They actually came to the BERA conference and gave a presentation. Lockdown happened. We returned to the school. The children were now in year 6, and we did the same thing. The school gave us a week of filmmaking. And we were very careful with our permissions, film and young people and young people's faces. And really, we've learned many work that I've done, particularly in Rotherham with girls and young women, that young people don't necessarily want their faces in things. So we had a whole week of filmmaking, and then we had 6 groups with 6 young people in each group. And at the end of the filmmaking, we went around each of the groups, and in each of the groups, one person said no. So we couldn't write or disseminate anything. However, we just picked ourselves up and we asked them what they wanted to do, and they wanted to do a book, and this is their book, and anyone who's clever enough to read the title gets an award, but I can't give you an award, sorry. So this is this idea of how do you, if you can't take away data, what do you do? And what we've done is we've wrapped that into this idea of research creation, which I think you'll hear about a little later with Sarah as well, and practice research. And then also the children owning the data and making their book. And we have actually written about that in an article. So takeaways, recognize that no is a really good word. I'm always really happy with young people say no, because actually they need to. We felt they need to do. I always remember in Rotherham, one of the youth workers saying, can you encourage the young people to say no? Work with consent. I mean, I know in most ethics committees they're working with assent, but we work quite strongly with consent. And I've got an amazing ethics team at ManMet who support the work that I do really well. Consider how you work with data from children. Try and bring the data together with the children, which means they have to come and co-present, they co-author, their names are present if they want to be actually recognised, and it's a CD building thing. Make ethics the focus of your project, not an awkward milestone, and do not take pictures of children ever without explicit consent. I always ask at the moment of taking. Final one, I think I've got 5 minutes left. This is a new project, Voices of the Future. It thinks of children and young people as inheritors of a world at risk of collapse through climate change. And one of the things we're trying to do is ask children and young people to design treescapes as well as measure trees in different ways, laser scanning, diameter tapes, hands, to measure how much carbon trees are taking out of the atmosphere. However, we quickly realized when we constructed this, in fact, the scientists realized that this relies on a willing group of citizen scientists. And much of the NERC work that I have been encountering and the impact work, our public engagement work, does have this model of the kind of the keen young person who's a keen scientist. But we thought that was a bit of an ethical dilemma, because it basically means that there's the good children who like tree planting and all of that, and then what happens to the other children. So one of the things we're working on, and this is an article I'm writing with now, Paul and Abby Hackett, is I'm working on the idea of what a good research child can do in a project. If you have your perfect child, what about the other children? And also your notions of childhood are quite problematic. I'm quite interested in actually the children, the naughty boys who climb the trees, who get covered in mud. And actually, you can learn so much from looking outside the one who puts their hand up all the time. But I think it's something we really need to think about in public engagement. So takeaways from the good research child: consider the practices you want to do and be prepared to change them. I didn't realize worms were a thing. Worms are clearly a thing, you can see from that picture. Place your gaze onto everyone. Don't just have answer the children with good answers and put their hands up as the focus. Don't just rely on those children. We all know those children. Work with children's capacities and timescales. I'm always interested in the children who work at different paces, who have different needs. In the Odd project, we worked with a deaf unit, which was amazing. Don't rely solely on language as a form of communication. We found drawing to be a much more effective mode of working. I always tell my students, don't use interviews, focus groups and questionnaires, because they are very adult-centered with children particularly. And don't use children as a way of making your project more attractive. It's so seductive to have this lovely picture of a child. Don't do that. So I'm getting to the end because I'm always really keen to be on time. I'm obsessed with not taking up time. These are takeaways from my work. Think about what your data is reproducing. Reflect on the assumptions lying behind your data. Whose assumptions does it support? Enable and support the people who say no to being in research. They're great. Don't be sad. Just think, hooray, they're actually people who are understanding what I've asked them to do and deciding not to do it. That's fantastic. Consider whose voice counts and why. One of the things is the chatty children. What about the other children, and also the children who feel, who sense, who think? Multilingual, we work very much in multilingual communities, which is amazing, and multimodal knowledge, that's drawn knowledge. It tends to be less visible to people. Knowledge is not always encoded in reports, they're very linguistics. Films and images might be better. Recognize practices within the real world and decenter the sites and spaces of thinking. We had a meeting recently at Pittsmore Adventure Playground in Sheffield, and I felt that was one of my most successful meetings. Meeting in universities are not great for doing co-production, just to say. So here's some publications to follow. Some of them are about the Doing Research Creation in School one is about what I've been talking about. Likewise, the Campbell Reimagining Contested Communities, there's a few other ones, and I hope you find them useful. I want to do my thanks really slowly. I'd really like to thank the HRC, ESRC, NERC and the UK Treescapes team, the Imagine team, especially Zainab Rasool, Beth Campbell and Eric Lassiter, the Feeling Odd Research team, especially Rachel Holmes, Steve Paul and Alma Park Primary School, and the Voices of the Future research team, especially Samia Ann Breen, Simon Carr, Peter Craft, and Caitlin Nunn, Steve Paul, Zoe Ashcroft and Blackrod Primary School in Bolton, the Good Research Child Writing team, Mel Hall and Abby Hackett, that's not out yet, and Steve Poole, the artist who did many of the projects with me. Thank you, everybody, and thank you yet again for asking me. It's been super fun giving this presentation.
Hey, thank you. That was fascinating and really insightful. And I can see, I have limited experience in co-production, but for those who know, I used to be an archaeologist and did do a lot of work with local communities. And I can see a lot of what you say common themes in what you say that would apply to the discipline I used to be a part of. And I'm sure both the challenges you've articulated, those themes I mentioned, and also the solutions you mentioned would be applicable to a huge range of disciplines. So thank you so much. That's really fascinating. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A, and we've already got a whole bunch of questions in the chat. So thank you very much, everyone. Let's start looking at those. Maria asks, how do you ensure that all voices are heard equitably?
So, Maria, there's different answers to that question. Budgets are the first answer. So when I review bids, which I do a lot, I always look down the line for budgets. Are you paying people? And that includes young people. We're working with refugee background young people. And recently they went on a trip to DEFRA and talked to DEFRA, and we paid them to go. The second thing is, it's interesting, that DEFRA thing. The DEFRA team, the two of them, listened for a whole 3 hours to 3 young people. I think it's listening requires time. So making sure voices are listened to is quite a skill. And the person actually in charge, she had experience working with refugee background young people. So time, money. In terms of children and young people, a lot of the issues, there's a lovely article called "It's Never Okay to Say No to Teachers" by Perpetua Kirby. It's recognizing the constraints of school, but working with school to create a space of practice. And that's quite hard. It takes a lot of nerve. I went into film club in a school on Monday where we're doing a film club, and I had a worksheet, I had a plan, and then Steve, who I'm working with, said, look, just forget it. And we didn't do anything, and the children made the film. And having that nerve, it requires so much that we don't do, which is not doing, adults getting out of the way. And that's really hard. Film club, way more experienced in filmmaking than I am. This is young people about year 8. But actually to be able to not do is really, really hard. So those are my 3 takeaways of hearing voices. And also multilingually, I'm writing an article at the moment with Hal Badwan about language and about the need to work not in English. I do think that's a fundamental thing, that we need to shift English as a mode. And that sounds really, really hard and really, really stressful. But I just think that's part of it, is working multilingually.
That's really interesting, thank you. 2 questions about funding contributors. Jan notes that, that she struggled to get payment for non-academics and projects, and the biggest hurdles have been academics, other academics. How do you bring them around? And Peter notes the AHRC requires non-HI partners to be contributors, not beneficiaries. So how do you get funding? How do you get academics and funding agencies to say, actually, these participants are worthy of payment?
It's not difficult. Sorry, it's not difficult right now. I think I sit in lots of panels, and the only thing we get cross about is if the co-research team are not adequately recompensed in that budget line. I think the HRC particularly working really hard. There is a scheme they had for community partners as co-investigators. There's a lot of different schemes coming out which do ask, I mean, I know the Young Foundation doing work on communities as the instigators of research. I think it's going, the direction of travel is making those equitable structures more equitable. But certainly panels are really, really keen to see people funded. The thing that's possibly problematic is academics not recognising that. And also academics who kind of expect their buyout to not match that. The thing that I was so proud of was the £6,000 to £9,000 that the community partners got for the Imagine project, and the academics got roughly the same in their buyout. The academics didn't like it. Here's some lovely pieces of citation. The other thing is we did in the ESRC project, we set up a great scheme, which was at the University of Sheffield, for a one-form payment scheme for everybody to get in the project. When they went to a conference, they just got a one payment thing of £120, whoever they were. And Sheffield enabled that. I think we do need to work with our finance teams to try and encourage them to think differently about how to do that. But we were very lucky because Sheffield did that.
That's brilliant, thank you. We've had a lot of questions about consent, particularly in relation to children. I'm kind of, there's lots of similarities, so I'm going to lump those questions together. We have where you have, what's the role of parenting consent, particularly ongoing permissions such as things as photography? Do they provide general consent at the start and then modified by the children's wishes? And do you have a particular process of consent that you use with children?
So this is a very complicated answer. Let's do the parents first. So with the parents in the schools, when we come in, we all send the parents out a form and the schools, bless them, collect that and give us a list. And that's the most important thing, because there will be some children who are basically in care and can't be photographed. So that happens first. We then do a very long set of sessions with children that take practically the whole morning in small groups, talking through the information sheet, which takes ages, particularly with year 3s and 4s, and then the whole notion of consent. And they do those in small groups, and we go around, and there's often one academic to each small group, and that takes ages. Then we go and do the project, and at that point, some of the children who've said no, because they love saying no, have said, actually, I really like doing it, and that's always a bit complicated, so we redo the consents. None of this at that point is going out of the school. Then, if we want to do something like I did with Zoe, a whole new form goes out. That went to Zoe's father actually last week, a media consent form. Zoe had already said she really wanted it to go on the web, so we got, and Zoe talked about it to me. So Zoe's father is now the person who's in charge of Zoe's work in terms of uploading it onto the online thing that it's going to go to. I think one of the things that's really important is to do it all in slow stages. We also spent some time before in the school working with the children. Now, some people would argue you should just go in and work with ethics, and I agree that's a really important thing to do. But for us, and for our other project in Aberdeen, what it enabled us to do is to get to know the children. So we did some just lessons, and the lessons were just about trees and hope and stuff. And we didn't record anything, but it meant that they knew who we were and they were quite comfortable with us. And by the time we came around to doing our small groups, they were really quite happy. Whereas I think part of the problem was they didn't know what they were consenting to. And actually by doing the thing, and my poor research assistant is still sad that we can't collect any of that data. And I'm like, no, it's good because they got to know us. I think I was helped by some incredibly good people on the ground. So big shout out to Claire Fox from the Ethics Committee, who helped navigate that. Because one of the things you do need is the support for those things. And also the schools. The schools kept all the parental consents and kept us informed about that. And the schools really, we always showed every film, everything to the children and the school before it went out of the school. We were really careful, actually. And I think, to be honest, I love ethics because it gives academics a really good reason to work collaboratively. It's almost like the reason.
That's really interesting. I think we've got time for one very last quick question, which you've begun answering, which is Helen says it's great you have such a good relationship with your ethics committee. How do you recommend people build those relationships, especially regarding co-production?
I think you appreciate what they do. I actually think I was very happy when ethics came in. I can't remember when it was, like the mid-2000s, because I thought actually, as somebody who works with children and young people, I really like that attention. So the first thing is appreciate them. The other is actually work with different organisations that you like, professional organisations, bodies. Like, so I use the British Sociological Association, British Educational Research Association, and the BPS, the British Psychological Association's guidelines a lot. And those guidelines are very respected. So I don't just go in and say, this is what I think. I go, here's this, here's this, here's this. And I put a case study on the ESRC's website, actually, on the ethical challenges of co-production, and described a two-stage thing where we worked with community partners to construct the ethics forms, and then we did them. And that was, again, big shout out to University of Sheffield. But I think it's about those professional guidelines often helping you navigate that. So that's what I did.
That's really helpful. Kate, thank you so much for today. It's been a fascinating, really insightful session, and both hearing about your own research and the challenges you faced and the many practical solutions you propose, but also understanding how that can sort of be thematically applied to so many other different types of research across the disciplinary spectrum, and it's relevant far beyond the university sector as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.